All right, we're about to dive into a pretty provocative argument, and it all comes from one single, really compelling source. What we're going to do today is break down this author's claim that a very specific ideology is, well, having a really negative effect on society. We'll walk through their diagnosis, what they see as the consequences, and finally, their call for a major change.
So the whole piece kicks off with this incredibly blunt statement. It's really designed to just grab you, right? It frames our current moment as a time where we're choosing these kind of pleasant fictions over hard realities. You know, the idea that an everyone gets a prize mentality has become a global thing.
So, who's actually making this argument? Well, it's a strategist and technologist who goes by the name Silverbee. Now, their background is all about using tech to democratize information. So this perspective, you got to understand, is rooted in a deep belief in accessible, transparent knowledge. And that's really the foundation this whole critique is built on.
Okay, so let's get right into the heart of the diagnosis here. The argument is that the big conflict of our time, it's not what you might think. It's actually a battle between two totally opposing forces, what the author calls objective truth, and on the other side, subjective performance.
Now, this is really important. We need to look at how the central term here is defined. And just to be super clear, this is the author's working definition for this argument. They present woke ideology as a doctrine that's built on three main pillars. First, the idea that language can literally reshape reality. Second, that truth isn't some fixed thing, but it's subjective. It changes depending on the person or group. And third, that just feeling uncomfortable is actually a form of oppression.
And this slide just lays out that core conflict perfectly. On one side, you've got truth, which the author describes as objective, stubborn, based on facts that you can actually verify. And then, on the other side, you have this ideology, which is framed as subjective, performative, so it's more about how you appear to others, and it's all based on feelings. For Silverbee, this right here is the fundamental divide.
Okay, so let's see where this goes. If that's a diagnosis of the problem, what are the real-world symptoms, according to Silverbee? Well, the argument goes on to say that this way of thinking is having a deeply, deeply corrosive effect on society as a whole.
And they list some really specific consequences. For one, governments become more divisive because they're focusing on optics instead of actual substance. Then there's the claim that a new form of racism, disguised as equity, starts to emerge. And this is a big one. From this perspective, constructive criticism becomes impossible. It's just seen as an attack, not a chance to get better. This, in turn, leads to a society that just gets stuck, totally static, because admitting you made a mistake, which is how you grow, is now something that gets punished. The author really hammers this point home with a pretty stark warning. This quote, I think, captures it all. It's this belief that when a culture starts prioritizing protecting feelings over confronting tough truths, it just becomes inherently fragile. And in this view, a fragile culture, well, it can't build a strong, unified society. It can only lead to a fractured one.
Now, this cultural shift, in Silverbee's analysis, doesn't just happen in a bubble. The piece argues that it's directly fueling a really powerful political backlash, what's described as a rebellion against a suffocating culture. So here's the chain reaction that Silverbee lays out. It starts with what they see as ideological rigidity, which creates this culture of, enforced politeness and selective morality. As a reaction to that, a big part of the public starts looking for a way to rebel against it. And this, the piece contends, is what directly leads to the surge of political figures like Donald Trump, who are seen as a total rejection of that so-called woke speak.
And the argument doesn't stop there. It actually broadens out even further. The author suggests that this same dynamic, where this rigid ideology just replaces reasoned, nuanced debate, is also a factor in the flare-up of conflicts we're seeing on the global stage, making things like diplomacy and mutual understanding way, way harder.
So, after diagnosing the problem and laying out all these consequences, where do we go from here? Well, the final part of the argument isn't just a critique. It's a direct call for a really fundamental change in how we approach things. It's a call to start confronting reality.
And what's really fascinating is how Silverbee frames this call for change. They make it really clear that, from their point of view, the target isn't compassion. It's not the desire for genuine progress. The real enemy, the danger, is falsehood. The act of collectively just agreeing to believe in things that aren't actually true.
So what's the prescription then? Well, it basically boils down to these 4 actions. First, to stop lying, to ourselves, to each other, and about history. Second, to have the courage to actually face reality, even when it's super uncomfortable. Third, to make an active choice to pick stubborn, enduring truth over the more attractive stories that an ideology might want to be true. And finally, to commit to building our society on a foundation of honesty. Because from this perspective, that's the only foundation that can actually last.
And that leaves us right here, with this central tension of the entire argument, presented as a clear choice. On one side, we have protecting these carefully constructed narratives to make us feel safe and secure, and on the other, we have confronting a messy, complicated, and often difficult reality. So the piece basically leaves us with this question: is that the fundamental conflict of our time?